Hello, everybody. Welcome to that word chat. Wonderful to see everybody here, including our 7 guests. We've got a lot to get through in the next hour because we're going to talk about all of the words that were interesting and informed us about what 2021 was all about. I'm going to introduce all 7 guests at once, and then we're going to go one by one and talk about what word of the year each of these organizations chose last year. But we're also going to kind of make it a panel and let everybody jump in and speak whenever they feel like it. So I'm kind of hoping that we're going to get some people, some name calling, some drama as these lexicographers disagree on what the word of the year is. And feel free to talk about what your word of the year is in the chat. If you have any questions, we'll try to get to them. But like I said, we've got a lot to get through in the next hour. So I'm going to introduce them in the order we're going to call on them, and they can say hi, so you get to see their faces. So we have Fiona Mcpherson, senior editor of New Words at Oxford Languages. And hi, Fiona.
Hello.
Fiona is coming to us from Germany, but she works for the Oxford. Amanda Laugesen, director of the Australia National Dictionary Centre in Canberra, I believe, Australia.
Hello.
Hi, Amanda. We have Wendelin Nichols, publishing manager at Cambridge Dictionaries.
Hello.
Hello, Wendelin. John Kelly, managing editor at dictionary.com.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, coming to us from Texas, Austin. Peter Sokolowski, editor at large for Merriam-Webster dictionaries.
Hello.
Hello, Peter. Peter, you're not at home. Are you in the
I don't live here. No. This
Okay.
is a radio studio where we recorded our podcast today. We were at a session that's our plug for our podcast. So I figured I'd just stay here and keep working. So I'm working from the radio studio.
Excellent. All right, and Ben Zimmer of the American Dialect Society. He's a writer for the Wall Street Journal and the Atlantic, co-host, since we're plugging podcast, of Spectacular Vernacular podcast, which is terrific. And he is actually the most frequent guest on that word chat. So.
Is this my 4th appearance? I've lost track.
I would say at least 4th.
Okay.
1, 2, yeah, I think 4th. Yeah.
Shooting for the 5 timers club,
Yeah. You get a mug, I think, when that happens. And then also we have, so those people all represent organizations that have chosen a word of the year. But there's one other word of the year, one other organization, who is Lynne Murphy, who has not chosen a word of the year yet, but has chosen one, is going to reveal it, do the big reveal right here on that word chat, coming to us from the University of Sussex in England.
Hello.
Oh, there you are. I got all the screens up, and there's so many faces. It's wonderful that I have to actually search for the people I want to talk to. All right, but let's start with Fiona. Fiona is, like I say, coming to us from Germany, senior editor for New Words at Oxford. What was the Oxford word of the year?
It was VAX, V-A-X. And we chose that back in November. So just to kind of preempt anyone saying, is it the Oxford Languages word of the 10 months? No,
That's
it's
what
not.
I was about to say. You took that away from me.
I got in there first. It's getting quite crowded, the whole word of the year market. So, we've all got to kind of find our slots. Yeah, we chose VAX. And I think that even if we'd waited until today to reveal it, I don't think we would have chosen a different word. And I think you can definitely argue that it's still the sort of the big social question. I mean, almost completely literally, right up to very topical at the moment. But I think the reason we chose VAX is we were looking at our corpus, and it became quite obvious to us that it was going to be a word to do with vaccines. That was really the big story of the year, from, the sort of the mooted vaccines at the start towards the first rollout, second rollout, boosters, etc., etc. And vax we hit upon because up until the last 12 months, it was actually quite rarely used in our corpus, just as a normal noun and verb, say. But we saw it being used over 72 times more in the last year than it had been before. So that was really why we chose that. It's also quite punchy, it's snappy, it's a little bit more attention grabbing maybe than vaccine. But that's why we chose it. And I think, as I said, I don't think we would have chosen a different word. And I think with word of the year, as you all know, you're looking for something that kind of sums the year up, says something about the year we've had. And yeah, vax then for us, there wasn't really any other choice.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was, and so we just had over the past weekend, the American Dialect Society chose its word of the year, and the final vote was it vaccine, or sort of vax in all its uses, correct?
Well, the runner-up was vax with one X or two, of course. Yeah, that was our runner-up, and a strong contender. Went down to a runoff with our winner, which we'll get to later, I guess.
Yes, right. We won't reveal it yet. Sorry.
And yeah, and vax as well. I mean, as lexicographers and linguists, we all love a productive word, don't we? So vax, never mind noun and verb, but you can also put it with other things like vaxathon, vaccinista, and then you've got your double vaxxed, single vaxxed. I mean, it's there's only one thing we love more than a kind of productive word like that, and that would be a portmanteau, but it doesn't have that, but it's got everything else. So We're pretty proud of our choice, I think.
Let's not forget hot vax summer.
Who could forget that?
Well, it is kind of forgettable. I mean, it sort of was this big thing that fizzled, right?
Yeah, because of Delta.
But well, I was going to say it'll probably come back. I kind of don't really know if I want it to come back or not, but anyway, time will tell.
So somebody had, I in my notes somewhere, somebody had double vax, and I don't know if that was one of the Australian sort of not the selection, but a choice. And double vax, I don't think is something that we really use in America so much.
Yeah, it was on our shortlist. Obviously, we recognise the ubiquity of vax here in Australia. I'll come to talking about our Australian word of the year in a little while, but yeah, I mean, I guess the reason why we put double vax there was because it was very much used here in Australia. We didn't tend to use the word jab at all, perhaps because there was an article that did the rounds that said how much we hated jab, and then it seemed to completely fall out of usage because people disliked it so much. I think in the UK, jab, I think the Oxford report on Word of the Year said that jab was used a lot more in the UK than perhaps elsewhere. So we definitely have seen double vax. Now, of course, we're talking about boosters. So no doubt 2022, we're going to see more of this language on our Word of the Year list.
Right. We have a question from the room already about vax.
Yes, this is from Elizabeth. If you want to unmute and ask your question.
Oh, I'm just interested in, somebody already mentioned this about any discussion between the single and double X versions. I've been, if there was any discussion at Oxford about that, it amuses me how strongly some of my language Twitter compatriots feel about it.
Yeah, there's nothing like spelling and spelling variants to get people quite upset, exercised. You can choose whichever word you want. I mean, yeah, we definitely know,
especially things that make hardly any difference like that.
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, if it's important and nobody really is going to get so excited about it, it has to be something kind of trivial like that. I mean, yeah, we definitely noticed the variants, as you say, and I guess that's another reason why vax kind of, although we chose the one with single X, which I think is probably what you would see most. Well, I don't know, maybe not. I guess it depends where you are. We went for the single because I think that for us that was the more common one. But yeah, people do get quite excited about that. I mean, you've just mentioned, when you were mentioning jabbed, coming from Scotland, you see, we say jag with a G. And so I'm kind of always quite insistent that that's what I always say. I've lived in England for a long time now. I'm in Munich, but I always try to just kind of assert my Scottishness where I can. So that's another one. Jabbed, although it's completely ubiquitous in Britain as a whole, jag just sounds more natural to me. So yeah, that's language.
Interesting. And so any of our other lexicographers, I mean, we have seen a lot of this double X, maybe not with vax, but in terms of anti-vaxxed.
We certainly had a very active Slack thread on 1X versus 2X. I think lexicographers would be the first to say both and embrace the complexity. I agree with Fiona. I see single X in an uninflected form or noun forms, anti-vax, things like that, or attributive noun forms. And then in inflected forms, I see the double X, probably due to patterns of English gemination and vowel indication and things like that. Happy to hear from the rest of the folks on that matter.
Well, it showed up, as the passive form vaxed, partially on the model of doxed, which comes out of the sort of tradition of intentional misspellings online of DOXXED. That seemed to be the immediate model for doing 2 X's, although people may have their own reasons for doing it. But it was interesting that the 2 X's tended to appear in, as John said, in those inflected forms. So you get anti-vaxxer or double vaxxed and that sort of thing, but typically 1 if it's just standalone or in a phrase like hot vac summer.
And Peter, Merriam-Webster went with vaccine as the word of the year. So so not vax, but the full word.
Yeah, I mean, vax as a standalone word, VAX, vax meaning vaccine, it's not really something I use or hear a lot. Vaccine, it was just the the plain Jane word, but it's such a big idea, and really it's 2 ideas. It's the medical story, but it's also this policy story that regarding mandates. And what we saw was coming out of 2020, when vaccines had already been developed and were begun as treatment, we saw that this word was much higher in our lookup data, starting from the first moment of the year, and it stayed high. I just anecdotally noticed when I glanced at our lookup list that vaccine was always sort of in the top 20 or top 25 words out of 500,000 words. So I knew I was slacking my colleagues in May and June, just saying, oh, this is going to be word of the year, simply because if it's so high on a day-to-day basis, that's just a lot of volume of a very meaningful word. What we saw was basically a 600% increase year over year. But if we take 2020 out of it, because vaccines were already a story in 2020, and compare 2021 to 2019, a time before COVID for all of us, that difference was 1,048%. So a really big jump for a word that gets high volume. So that's what we look for, is to tell a story about the data, which is to say, more or less reading the data and then simply subtracting what we call the evergreen words, the noise words, the words that are looked up day in and day out, regardless of the news. They tend to be abstract words like integrity or paradigm or ubiquitous or conundrum, or words that are troublesome in English like affect and effect. We just removed all of those words, and what we were left with was vaccine on top of the heap.
And I think that's something that Merriam-Webster does a little bit differently. I think all the organizations, all the dictionaries they can all look up what's being looked up on their site.
That's not, sorry to interrupt you, but
Cambridge.
Sorry, Mark, just to say that Cambridge is totally based on data as well and on lookups. So they're not the only ones. Yeah. I can talk more about that when it's my turn. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Oh, good. Interesting. No, see, I didn't know that. That's good.
Yeah.
So Cambridge or Merriam-Webster.
Well, not. I mean, it's utterly informed by lookups. That's where we start. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll add that dictionary.com absolutely starts with data, and if the data that we have a very similar process with Merriam, and sometimes the data is noisy and you don't have a clear standout like that when you do those subtractions, and so you have to slice the data in different ways. And we'll talk about that more when it's our time.
Yeah. And eventually we'll ask Ben Zimmer the process, which is for the American Dialect Society, is totally chaos democracy at its greatest. So we're I wanted to ask you, Peter, there is maybe briefly you could talk about the big vaccine controversy. Why did Merriam-Webster change the definition of vaccine at the government's behest?
That's right. Yeah, we're getting paid by the. Yeah. What the story of lexicography, of course, is the story of revision, and that goes against, I think, what a popular notion is, which is that words can't change. And of course, all of us listening today know that words always change. But one of the changes that was significant in the term vaccine that was not recorded in the Merriam-Webster definition was the existence of a messenger RNA kind of vaccine. It's a new kind of technology. It's a new kind of technique. It has existed, obviously, before 2020. But it was in 2020 that this was explained over and over again in the popular press. So not just in medical journals, but in the New York Times and the Boston Globe and articles that many of us were reading. And so this kind of urgent specificity does inform our revision process. And so our now sense 1B, the new sense to the word vaccine, explains what messenger RNA is, and that this is a different kind of vaccine. It functions in a different way, and these definitions both kind of explain, in a sense, how the vaccines work. That is to say, there's an inactive, or attenuated pathogenic agent, which is the old way, which is how we understood vaccines to be before mRNA, and now there's the mRNA one. And we also use the term. In the definition, we use the term immune response as opposed to the term immunity. And what we found was there was the criticism of this, because I guess people understood the term immunity to mean kind of like a wall or a suit of armor or a barrier. And that's actually not medically what's going on with a vaccine. It never was. You're sort of inciting or inducing some of the illness for your body to have a response. So anyway, we now have an entry at immune response to explain what this is. So to my mind, this is a good revision because it gives you lots more specificity, lots more information. A lot of people complained about it basically because they felt that we were in some way endorsing or advocating some kind of political position. But really what we're going for, as always, is just accuracy.
Yeah, and Merriam-Webster's been there before with that kind of thing. But it shows how prevalent and important the word was as and it's interesting to look up. So, I mean, we've had this conversation before. Most people know what a vaccine is and what it does. So to have that, why are so many people looking it up?
Yeah, and really, this is what I've learned over the course of looking at the data for now 20 years, which is initially there were surprises. Why was the word princess the most looked up word when Princess Diana died? Sometimes they're very basic words. The big example also was Michael Jackson's death, and it was emaciated was the term. Again, a term that many adults would be familiar with in the context of perhaps hunger in the developing world, but not in the context of the most famous pop star in the world. So if there's a cognitive dissonance, but more especially if there is a specificity, if there's a legal or a technical or a medical specificity, or in this case, what I would call an urgent specificity. We were all involved in this, and that sends people to the dictionary for more nuance, for more detail. Some people may be interested, like you and I, in etymology and phonetics, but I think most people are interested in these entries, what I would call encyclopedic character, the encyclopedic nature of these definitions that gives you detail. And that's what people are going for with these definitions, I'm almost sure. Right. I always say we're good at reading data, we're not good at reading minds, but I think in the case of vaccine, we can see that this story sent people to the dictionary for sure.
Right. Okay, so let's go from vaccine and vax, a very broad a word that was used universally in the English-speaking world. Let's go back to Australia, and talk about Amanda's, tell us what the Australian National, oh, and I should say the Australian National Dictionary and the Macrae Dictionary. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. You'll correct me. Okay. Chose the same word, which is unusual. So the two big organizations that choose words of the year in Australia picked the same word. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so this year, it was a bit of a fluke, I think, that we both came to the same word, which was stroll out. So stroll out was used for the slow implementation of the vaccine program here in Australia. You may or may not be familiar with the fact that our government were very slow. We didn't have a lot of cases here, so perhaps it wasn't really until the Delta wave really hit that things started to speed up. So there was quite a bit of criticism around the pace of the rollout, which led to it being called the stroll out. So in terms of our process, I mean, we don't go on lookups. So we essentially are looking for a word that would fit the definition of our Australian National Dictionary. So the Australian National Dictionary is a dictionary of Australian English, words that are either originally Australian, uniquely Australian, or are used more in Australia than elsewhere. And it's a dictionary on historical principles modelled on the Oxford English Dictionary in format. And so we are really looking for Australian words. So we were looking for, I mean, obviously, vaccine and vax and all the words around the pandemic have very much dominated here in Australia, of course, but we were looking for things that might be used more here in Australia or which would be uniquely Australian. So stroll out was one of the words that we had picked up on through the year and was on our longer list and then on our short list. And we decided on stroll out in a committee. A committee of our editors decides which one of the words will become our word of the year. I think, you know, and we look for something that very much speaks to the sort of social, cultural, political landscape in Australia through the year, as well as looking for something that kind of fits into that Australian English category. We don't always get the ideal word that's both something that would potentially become an Australian National Dictionary word eventually if it gets taken up, and something that very much speaks to the you know, cultural landscape and political landscape. But this year, I think stroll out, you know, it stood out, I think, as both something that seemed to be used more here in Australia. I think there was a little bit of usage of it in New Zealand. And also had that potential to be used for other things as well into the future. So that was our reasoning. And I think the Oxford, you know, we work closely with the Oxford English Dictionary, and I think the Oxford team had also picked up on the word stroll out and mentioned its potential to be used for other programs. So
in Australia, you mean?
Endless complaints about government and other such programs.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so great about it is that just what you said. I think it's a word that has potential to be applied to other slow implementations. You know, it doesn't just have to be, it's not at the moment, yes, it is COVID specific, but that in the future, who knows, I could see that kind of having quite a lot of potential sticking around.
And we have a question that's pertinent from the room on stroll out.
We do. This one's from Karen. Karen, go for it.
Hi, Amanda. I wonder if we know who coined stroll out or where it was first seen or used.
Well, we had tracked it back to our head of the ACTU, which the Australian Council of Trade Unions, I think is what that acronym stands for, had used it in criticism of our current government's program. And that was the first usage that we found, and I think Oxford had found. But the Macquarie Dictionary, when they released theirs, had suggested that it had been used in Canada. So it's possible that there was an earlier usage. Certainly in Australia, it seems that Sally McManus was the first to use it, and from there it became picked up by the media. I should say when we released our word of the year, there was some people hadn't heard it, which was really odd to us because we'd seen it quite a lot in the media, and the people who had heard it instantly kind of went, oh yeah, we understand it, we recognize it, we can see how it kind of fits into the year that we've had. That was, we sort of went with our word of the year a couple of weeks before the Macquarie. And so, you know, we got the bizarre choice for word of the year on our, you know, the equivalent your morning show, Today Show, you know, our morning pundit saying. Yeah, I mean, I think we'd certainly picked up a lot of usage of the word. It was definitely out there.
That does sometimes happen though, doesn't it? It's happened, but not with Vax, because I think people had obviously heard of it, but certainly previous words of the year we've chosen, you quite often get people saying, never heard of it. And we're kind of like, really? But we're seeing so much usage of this. The one that really made me laugh was, this was obviously years ago when we chose selfie, and quite a few people said, oh, that's never going to catch on. And this like, okay, well, maybe you weren't quite right there.
You hear the opposite too. You picked this word. That's such an obvious word.
Yeah.
That's not my word of the year. So we can't please everybody.
No, that's very true.
No, I think you never win, but they never think it's the fact that they haven't heard it as a problem for them. It's always you've done the wrong thing. It's our problem. But they don't like, or they just don't like it. So I did a couple of radio interviews where, you know, people are like, oh, I just don't like this word. Why did you choose it?
Well, it doesn't have to be a liked word.
Likability is not necessarily the key factor.
Yeah. Well, let's go to a different word of the year that it certainly encompasses a lot about the year, and with Cambridge University and Wendell and Nichols.
Yeah, so we kind of went in a little bit of a different direction that probably makes more sense when you think about the fact that we are the website for learners of English, that our dictionary has that kind of focus. And so one is that we're global, and the other is that we're for learners. And so we do start with lookups, right? Because we get, you know, 45 million unique visitors a month, and we really want to start with what both spikes, which are a single day or a couple of days when a word suddenly just gets looked up a lot, which I'm sure Peter's familiar with looking at this for keeping track of what's happening politically. You know, so we could see, for instance, in January of last year, we got spikes for insurrection and impeachment and inauguration and for acquit, right? And it's interesting. And when you think about the overall zeitgeist, well, this is American politics, and it's not, you know, people in Peru or, you know, Hong Kong aren't going to be quite as interested, right? Although they may want to know what those words mean in that moment. And you could argue that the one we chose, perseverance, is also totally related to the fact that the Mars rover was named Perseverance, and people didn't know what that word meant. But we were looking at the other things that had spiked, and we're going, well, we're not going with the impeachment business. And we had quarantine last year, and we are A, tired of COVID words. B, everybody else is probably going to choose a COVID word, you know, because you're thinking like the marketing people are going, can you choose something that's not COVID? But for us, it was what it gave us, you know, the more we thought about it and we watched how it behaved over the next few months, and it stayed high, whereas this word had never figured. We look at the top sort of 500 lookups overall and the top 1,000 spikes, nowhere near that ever, ever, ever. And then suddenly this year it was there because of that rover, but then it stayed. And we thought, you know, what better word to capture what is needed, not just from COVID, and that's just, but the natural disasters and all the political stuff. And to highlight, it gave us a chance to look at our thesaurus, which teases out the difference between, well, what's perseverance and determination and doggedness and stick-to-itiveness. And for a learner to be able to see that perseverance is persisting when you don't know whether you're going to see your goal or not, versus determination. We go to the corpus and see determination is always used around language to do with goals, right? So we can have a real story, and then we can create materials for teachers to do a lesson plan around, right? So that's why we go with that kind of thing. We're looking for just what people are looking up, zeitgeist, and something that we can pull out for learners. So it was just that combination of things. VAX, interestingly, not on the radar, not on those top lookups at all. At all. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is there a reason for that? I mean,
no, lack of interest of the people that use our website and that word, they're not encountering that word. And you know, I was hearing, John, was it you saying that VAX itself, I see it mostly in the context of anti-vaxxer, right? And that is where I see that happening. And I think that the overlap between the people that are upset about anti-vaxxers and our demographic that use our dictionary, not a big overlap. That's all I can posit. Really, I'm not a social scientist. I can't tell you why people don't look up given words on our website. I'm interested in what they do look up, or if they look it up and we don't have it, you know, that's where we get a lot of our, you know, things that we know that we need to add, for instance, you know. So
sure. Okay.
Wendy, I just wanted to say I loved how you said when perseverance started showing up in your lookups, it just stuck around. So perseverance actually persevered.
Yes, yeah, that's good.
I was hanging out there.
I tell you, I was surprised when I looked at the article announcing the word of the year, and the picture at the top was of the Mars rover Perseverance, and I thought, well, that's not last year, but it was early last year. We tend to forget, I think.
Yeah, it was February when it spiked. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Gwendolyn.
Well, and I guess the other thing that I was thinking about in relation to all of this is just that the zeitgeist is something that we're always trying to capture. I think, you know, going back to the originator of the words of the year, which the ADS, you know, I really want to know, you know, the story behind this. I hope we get the time for that. But that I think that having an event like that also showcases how we can track people's reaction to it via what they look up. You know, I just think it's fascinating. I love being data driven in the decision making in that way.
Right.
John, sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, it was an aside. I was just thinking for the room, we talk a lot about evergreen lookups and events. And one thing we always see in the data, which is reassuring, which is heartwarming, is that people always come to the dictionary for astronomical events, whether it's some kind of a supermoon, whether it's some sort of, you know, extrasolar object, whether it's some sort of a meteor shower or eclipse. People are looking up and they're looking at the dictionary too. And given all the change and the turmoil for the room, it's nice that the stars still inspire us in our language.
We do have to filter out the noise, you know. I mean, the top several, you know, slots in any of our charts is the word sexy, always, the word hello, the word pronunciation, the actual word dictionary. So, you know, you really do, like you were saying, Peter, there are ones that you know that you just discard because it's statistical noise from the data, and then you see the true position of things. And we use their statistical ways to calculate the significance of the appearance of a given word in a spike relative to its normal frequency in the language as well. And that helps us notice how unusual it is that something spiked, you know, as opposed to every February 14th, the word Valentine spikes. That's not unusual.
Easter, a lot of other words that we're not going to repeat here at the top of the list too.
We'll do a show on that sometime. What are the top odd lookups? And let's stay in England before we go to Austin, Texas. We'll stay in England because Lynne Murphy has not announced her crossover word of the year. Lynne Murphy is blogs at Separated by a Common Language, and every year picks a word that has sort of made the leap, the transatlantic leap from the US to Britain and Britain to the US. Lynne's American from New York State at the University of Sussex. She's the author of Prodigal Tongue. Lynne, why don't you start by telling us your methodology?
My methodology, I mean, the funny thing about the separated by a common language words of the year is that they aren't about new words or words necessarily that have made the news. They're words that we have noticed, those of us who pay attention to Britain and America, as being fish out of water in the one place or another. So British words that have been noticeable in America this year, or American words that have been noticeable in Britain this year. Mm-hmm. So that's where I start from. And basically, it's me taking nominations from my readers and me noticing things. I would say nowadays, Ben Yagoda's blog, Not One-Off Britishisms, really, really helps me when it comes to looking at what's going on over in America, because since I'm in Britain, I don't always see it, but he's paying close attention to which British words are being used in the American press. So I have some thanks to give to him too. Yeah, terrific. Yeah, it's a very nerdy blog about just things that he notices that are, I think ring was the last one he did something about. He sees the word ring used as a verb in somewhere in America and writes about it, keeps track of it. So what are your crossover words of the year? Well, from last year, at the very end, I chose jab for the 2020 word of the year from Britain to America. And so that took it out of consideration for this year. And so it was a really difficult year for me. And I talk a little bit about this on the blogs that have just posted, that it's become harder and harder for me to find words that are crossing over, particularly in toward Britain. And I think that says something about the political moments we're in, the cultural moments we're in. But anyway, my words of the year from America to Britain, it's not a word of the year, it's a pronunciation of the year, and it's Dune, after the film. So in British English, in most British English, except for maybe Norfolk, it would be pronounced June with a little y sound. Quite different. I mean, that's close. Yeah. It's very, very close for Americans who aren't used to hearing those as different sounds. But for a lot of British people, they get very worked up about hearing people say, I mean, I just heard myself say news a minute ago. And that's so Britified because I've lived here long enough that I know better than to say news or I'm going to get in trouble. So, so that little is something that people have commented on and have been aware of themselves when they're talking about the film Dune, pronouncing it like an American would pronounce it because it's a Hollywood film. And I related in the blog to when the film Clerks came out. And people were very unsure about in Britain whether to say Clarks or to say Clerks. And most people say Clerks because that's what the people in the film say. So it's this splitting of the pronunciation for the media use, the film name, the proper name, and the word more generally. So that's my pronunciation of the year, unusually from America to Britain. And my British to American word of the year really should have been my word of the year for 2019, but I only did, the research on it this year to find out how much it's gone up since 2019. It's university, used where America would have traditionally used college. So talking about being in university, at university, being a university student instead of a college student. And what's interesting to me about that one is the place where I'm really seeing it in the data is in university, when I was in university, blah, 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 which is not what British people would mostly say. They'd mostly say when I was at university. So this British sense of the word university, meaning a time of study and a time in, an activity that you do when you're in your 20s or whatever, that has been shifted into the grammar of how we use the American word college. So I found that interesting. And
Yeah,
it's been just shooting up since 2019.
Really, I haven't been aware of it myself, but that's very interesting. But
You'll
then
notice it now.
I was in university years ago, so so that's probably why. Well, cool. Thank you for revealing that, the big reveal. Everybody here has it first, unless people have gone to your blog already.
Thank you for giving me the excuse to wait till the 11th to post it, because I was having a hard beginning of the year. So thanks very much.
Right. So let's go to Austin, Texas, and dictionary.com. John Kelly's managing editor of dictionary.com, and also I think a sort of maybe an unsuspected or unexpected word of the year choice.
Yeah, I'm actually down the road from you now, Mark. I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio now. So
you are. Excuse me.
Yeah, greetings from down 71. Yeah, we chose allyship as our word of the year. And I think for many that definitely seems surprising, definitely seems like an outlier, but it was born out of the same processes that many of my colleagues spoke of here. We began with the data and we sliced it until we really struck on the story that our data, that our lexicographical work was telling this year. And allyship is what turned up. So like Cambridge, like Merriam, like Oxford, we begin by looking at the data. We filter out the noise. We certainly saw that we almost had a three-way tie this year. We almost chose vaccine. Last year, Merriam-Webster and dictionary.com both chose pandemic. We almost had the trifecta this year with vaccine. It's a natural story. It's in the data too. We saw that vaccine year over year had sustained search interest higher. But it didn't really have a massive signal as that much higher. So our users, unlike Merriam's, unlike Oxford's, they weren't coming to us as much to look up vaccine. Compared to last year, was it higher? Yes, but not in a way that was, blockbuster numbers. We saw incredibly massive spikes too around the insurrection. On the day of or the day after, insurrection alone spiked 22,000%, and it was with a family of words. And I know my colleagues can speak to this too. Sedition, coup, banana republic, putsch, this whole family of words. And it spiked, but it wasn't really sustained throughout the year. And we also saw a lot of activity too around some of the more controversial but emerging terms in our culture around critical race theory. So we looked at our data, we filtered out the immediate noise, and then we saw some clear patterns, but none of them stood out as the full story of the year. So then we kind of connect the dots. We've got a story about the pandemic that's ongoing. We've got a story about political polarization that's ongoing. And then we look at and triangulate other data points. Conservatorship spiked with Britney Spears, Paralympian, Fellini-esque, Crybully, Acquit, Simp. The data for us was all over the place. And
Crybully?
Crybully, yeah. Greek alphabets, polyamorous. So we looked at, we looked at probably during, I think it was during June, perhaps due to a celebrity announcement or discussion around, sexual and romantic.
I think I remember.
And those often spike when celebrities use something or during, evergreen seasonal occasions. So we went into more corpus data. We went into the news, and we found that the conversation that people were having this year wasn't about just these terms themselves, but for us in our analysis, it was very much how we were talking about these events. And we were finding that people were looking up terms, talking about terms, having discourse on terms that were very much a conversation in language about who gets a voice, how do we react to this, who gets valued, who gets space. And we were seeing that this was a story of allyship. And this is something that is a continuation of a lot of the linguistic and cultural energy last year. We saw a lot of terms around the protests and Black Lives Matters, spiking and trending. We saw that continue into this year. And we also noticed that our lexicographers were doing work on the word allyship at the same time. And this is surprising perhaps for many. We chose a word that we just added to our dictionary this year. And that's because it takes time to add a word to the dictionary. It takes a lot of research. takes a lot of time to monitor the word and how it's evolving in the language. Is its usage widespread, et cetera? And it also just takes a lot of work to get into the dictionary from the back end too. And so we felt that the term allyship really spoke to, as Wendelin said before, the zeitgeist. It spoke to what we were experiencing at home in terms of the coronavirus, home and work in terms of DEI initiatives that we're following from next year. Also spoke to what was happening in terms of school with critical race theory. So this new term to our dictionary brought together themes we saw in our data. It brought together themes we saw in our culture. And it also speaks to how this word is having kind of an interesting moment in our language too. We see that it's been around for quite a time. It dates back in its general sense of alliance into the 19th century, but it's not until the late 20th century that it begins talking about allyship in a social justice sense. So it's been around for a few decades, but when you look into the data, it doesn't really take off until the past year or past 2 years or so. So it has a new prominence in our language, and it has prominence in some complex ways. People are looking up the word allyship. What is allyship? So there's a definitional query. People are using the term most commonly along with the word performative allyship. So there's a conversation going on about, are we actually being true allies? Are we being real allies? Are we just giving lip service to all this talk about social justice? And last but not least, I think what's really interesting about allyship is that it is an abstract concept. If you attend any of the American Dialect Society votes, you'll often hear people, but this word helps give me name to an important concept. And that's what's so powerful about new words. They help materialize these ideas that we have. And so anecdotally, when we revealed our word, or when our team had conversations with people about the word, there were some people, as was noted before, I've never heard that word. And for a lot of people, the term allyship, especially in its social justice sense, is brand new. But there was this kind of aha moment that many people had. And it was, yeah, that's exactly what I've been feeling or reading or reacting to in the conversations that I know that we're having on our PTA boards, or that we're having when we're grappling with work culture Zoom meetings. So we saw that this abstract concept of allyship has a kind of prominence in our language and our culture. And it's neat when a concept is doing that job for us, not just ally, but allyship. We're collectively signaling something in our discourse about our values, about our cultural moment, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. So data, culture, and allyship had the additional boost too of having a little bit of a positive educational boost as well, which I think we all welcome in these times.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's go to Peter Sokolowski, and Peter, we may not spend as much time as we'd like to with you, because we already talked a little bit about vaccine, the Merriam-Webster word of the year, and the basis for choosing that. But what else can you tell us about that? And the word was vaccine, but did you look at did you see similar spikes in vax and the variations on vaccine?
No, but I don't, that's a, hang on, that's a point. We have anti-vaxxer as an entry that is enormously popular. They're both in the top 10 lookups today as we speak, as it happens. Infrastructure, as John just mentioned, infrastructure, a massive infrastructure was another one that saw a lot of attention this year, as did insurrection. That's the point I was going to make. Insurrection, as John said. Infrastructure, I'll just very briefly talk about, because it was about the definition. When President Biden was talking about infrastructure, he was also talking about broadband and childcare and elder care. And so a lot of the discussion politically was, is that infrastructure if it's not a road or a bridge? And this hits the sweet spot of the famous Merriam-Webster citation files, the paper files that we have, which in the middle of the 20th century is really the richest source. And I was able to find, among other things, Secretary of State Atchison, 1952, the citation where he says that Secretary of State Acheson is in his report to the nation last night on the Lisbon meetings of NATO said airfields and port facilities were called infrastructure. He said he couldn't explain how they came to be called that. He added, despite this heavy handicap, good progress was made. So he was apologizing for the term. Infrastructure was the term used by the American military in the rebuilding of Europe after World War II, particularly France and Germany, when a lot of cities were leveled and there were American military bases, airports, and highways and bridges that were built. And that term, during the big surprise, the Eisenhower administration, was brought back to the United States. And that's when it's precisely the moment when we began to build the interstate highway system. So I love the fact that all of that connects culturally to a very important word. But the fact is, we haven't heard from Ben yet. So let's listen to the ADS story.
Well, let me tell you, yeah, and obviously the ADS, there are so many words that were discussed, and what a rich, wonderful discussion it was. Let me just ask you about, I think perseverance was one that saw, am I right, that saw a spike at Merriam-Webster?
Oh, of course, and it's a terrific word. And what we saw was that one spike was so high, we didn't find other tent poles for that word. So it's in our top 10 for the year for sure. We connected to that one story, the NASA story. It's a great story. We really wanted to see something other than a pandemic word as well. But the fact is that the numbers were just too great against it. However, it was such a significant spike that it's in our top 10.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we've got enough. Well, man, we got no time at all, but we'll run a little bit long. Nobody will complain. We do have a poll. So the American Dialect Society does an open vote on its words of the years, and because of the nature of online and virtual meetings, it was open to me and other people who might not normally make the trek to the meeting. So we're also going to do a vote. So stick around, because I've got a poll set up so we can, you in the room can decide what of the words of the year. I didn't tell people they were going to, they're like making a campaign speech, but we're going to vote on what we think is the best words of the year. So Ben, tell us, what was the mood in the room Friday night in the Zoom?
The mood in the Zoom room, yes. Well, yes, for the second year, we've had to do our meeting, which is typically in person. We've had to do that online. And I know that many of the people here were also in attendance for one or both of those Zoom WODIs. And it's been interesting, it was both times we've done it on Zoom. It's been a bit chaotic, but then again, it's chaotic when it's in person too. We got great attendance both times. This most recent time, there were about 350 or 400 people who were participating. We had some technical glitches along the way. Apologies to anyone who's here who was maybe stuck in the waiting room. We were like trying to get people in and there was a cap, but we managed to sort out our problems and have a great discussion, very lively, and we're able to vote not just for overall word of the year, but we always have all sorts of different categories like most useful, most likely to succeed, and so forth. And so it was a lively discussion, and we've heard already about the word that won, and that is insurrection. And it's interesting that insurrection ended up being the winner, as both John and Peter said. In January of 2021, it was a word that was getting tons of lookups, and typically we would find for a word that's very prominent at the beginning of the year, it's not necessarily one that people come back to at the end of the year when it's time to decide what word of the year should be. This was a different story. We didn't suffer from the recency bias, as often happens, where we're just focused on things at the end of the year. And the issue of the attack on the U.S. Capitol, which insurrection ended up being the term that we have used for that, despite all these other terms, coup and sedition and various other terms that were prominent then. Insurrection is the label. We talk about the insurrection, we talk about insurrectionists. The fact that it's still with us, a year later, now more than a year later, with the investigations into the insurrection and all of the ongoing discussion about what it means as kind of a threat to our democracy, what it means to our upcoming elections, and how how to learn from all of that. So, there were a lot of very interesting discussions, as there always are, for word of the year. As I mentioned, Vax was a runner-up. There was also strong showings from other terms like the Great Resignation, for instance, as it's this term that has cropped up for this a massive number of people leaving their jobs since the pandemic started. That did not win, but it's very possible that could be in the running for 2022, because I think that's going to continue to be a prominent term. Another one that was much discussed and one is most likely to succeed was anti-work, which goes along with that idea of sort of rethinking, the whole kind of work system and how people get exploited under capitalism and all the rest. So those were, all issues that were in the mix, but, there were, it's not a data-driven approach. It's very much people speaking and advocating for different words. And we heard some very impassioned, remarks about insurrection and why that should be word of the year. And I think that was what really carried it to the top, as people sort of thought back on it and said, yeah, that really should be, you don't have to like it. You don't have to like what it stands for, but we can't deny the importance, the significance in, our current social and political situation.
Right. Do you, as kind of running the show, you must have some. You spend your life looking at words and looking at uses and histories, and but you do a very good job, of course, of being objective. Is it hard to not try to put your thumb on the scale during these meetings?
Yeah. I try to, yes, definitely sort of let people discuss and not try to lead people to a particular, word that I might think should be the winner. And I just like seeing how it all develops. Again, it can very much be just kind of like the mood in the room, whether it's in person or via Zoom, and how people kind of state their case for and against different things. And that does make it different, I guess, from the more data-driven approaches that we've been hearing about. But that's okay. As you said, it's sort of messy democracy in action. It's about, again, sort of like who can sort of state the case in a way that like people connect to and say, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I agree with that. And so it's always interesting and always pretty unpredictable. I don't know. I don't think I have imagined that insurrection would necessarily win. But here we are. They could have gone for Vax. That would have been maybe a safer choice. But yeah, their thinking was a bit different on it. So it was interesting.
Yeah. Did you have money in the pool? Did you have a word?
Oh yeah,
He's Pete Rose in the situation here. So.
No wagering. But yeah,
you're in Cincinnati now, so you're Pete Rose focused. Yeah.
Exactly.
And as I mentioned, we have all these other categories, and I'll just sort of briefly mention some of those. I already mentioned anti-work for most likely to succeed. Most useful was one of my favorites, which was hard pants. The term for pants lacking an elastic waistband or stretchy fabric, unlike these soft pants favored by those working from home during the pandemic. I think that's an extremely useful word. Glad that won. Digital word of the year was actually a hashtag Free Britney, because of the movement for getting Britney Spears out of that horrible conservatorship that she was in. We mentioned that word. Pandemic
seems to have had an influence. So it was
exactly. Pandemic related word of the year, a special category we've had for the second year running, was actually won by boosted. And I saw this coming up in the chat because people are saying, this is a kind of a new way of using it to say that to get boosted means to receive the booster shot. But we have also seen boosterized as alternate forms. Boosted has been by far the most frequently occurring of those different ways of saying that. But yeah, so that was a winner. Supply chain was our sort of financial economic word of the year. Fauci ouchie was our most creative word of the year. So it was fun. I mean, looking back on a rather gloomy year, it was nice that there were moments of levity, moments of that people enjoyed and could look back on fondly. Beyond just many of the depressing headlines of the year.
Yeah, I will say the process is terrific. It's not just the outcome of what is the final word or words of the year, but the whole discussion and those that didn't win their categories is very interesting to be a part of that. So if you do an online component of it next year, I'm sure you'd like to be back in person, which also I think has, from reading about it, has a really interesting dynamic. But
yeah, I hope that in the future we can at least retain an online component, because I've loved having participation from, again, many of the people who are in this Zoom took part, who, like Mark, you were saying, you might not have made the trip. So I love the fact that we're able to incorporate sort of voices and opinions from all over the place, and I hope we can continue doing that.
Right. Okay, let's do a poll. Let's do a American Dialect Society process here, and I've got a poll up, and the idea is, I'm not very good with these polls, not like Grant Barrett, who does it for ADS. I think it was Grant who was doing it.
Yes.
Maybe I'm
Charles Carson actually was responsible for the polls.
That's right.
He was
That's right.
keeping it running smoothly. It was good.
Yeah. But anyway, I've got a poll, and I can maybe try to come up with a second poll where we eliminate the the also rans and go with the top vote getters. But I can't guarantee it because we're already over time. But I'll launch the poll now, and just give it a few seconds. Feel free to make your choice in the chat. Also defend your chat. And nobody can see this, but I guess I can do a little bit of the horse race here and tell you that Vax is doing quite well. Interaction is strong. Perseverance had a big jump early, but is slowing down. Allyship and Perseverance are neck and neck. Stroll Out, as expected, is not doing very well. It sort of wandered around the starting gate, trying to find its way. Let's see if we have 82% participate. Let's go a little bit more.
I've recused myself. I expect my colleagues did too. I don't want to.
Oh yeah. I don't want to
wagering here.
Oh, feel free to vote. Come on.
Okay, why not?
Yeah. Feel free. Once we get to like 85%, all right, we're at 85% in 1 minute. So I'm going to end the poll, and the clear winner. Oh, I have to show results. Clear winner is vaccine with 40%. Did not get a majority. Then insurrection did do quite strongly with 26%. Perseverance and allyship both at 13%.
Deja vu here from ADS.
Yeah. and Stroll Out as we expected. Good in Australia. Maybe not translatable. And then two people said something else. Who said something else, and what was it? If you want to unmute and go on camera and actually defend a different word. There are two of you. Something else. I caught them off guard, of course. Somebody in the Dane in the room says Boosty McBoost face. A nice construction. All right. I'm not going to try to make a second poll here, because I'm sure I'd just have you watch me typing for several minutes. But vaccine is the word chat word of the year, or vax with a double X, or vaccine with 40% of the vote. But it's been a great discussion. It's been tons of fun. So just a program note, we're back to we're going to do a monthly format now, just to give us a little bit of rest, and we'll be back next month, February 1st, I think, with Ann Curzon from University of Michigan, a linguist. And then not announced, but I'll announce it here for the first time in March. We have Dennis Duncan, who wrote this, I think the best title I've ever seen on a book, Index, A History of the. We're going to have him as a guest in 2 months. So you can sign up soon for that, and please sign up for Ann Curzon. She's wonderful. And thank you, Fiona, Amanda, Fiona and Amanda, who are at the extremes of late and early. Wendelin, John, Peter, Ben, and Lynne Murphy, of course. Thank you so much. It's been great. Let's do it again next year. It was a lot of fun. Thanks everybody for coming, and we will see you in a few weeks.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
Mark.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.